Good morning, guys. So it's the 23rd of October, it's Wednesday, and I've got a few Dax charts that I'm going to share with you this morning on this Dax Technical Analysis webinar stroke video. And I'm going to try and do 2 or 3 of these a week. And so the first one was on Monday, and maybe we'll try another one on Friday, which I think is Nevada Day in the US, but we'll continue to do things here anyway. So before we go into the charts, the trading disclaimer applies. It will appear in the description below if you're watching the video on YouTube, but alternatively make sure you're aware of that if you're in the room with me now. So today, the focus is still going to be on Brexit. Whether you love it or hate it, it's still the main order of business at the moment. And yesterday there was some interesting events. Prime Minister Boris Johnson had to pause the implementation of the Brexit deal. He actually won support for the principle of the deal, but lost a vote on the timetable. He was trying to force it through in 3 days, maybe to try and save face, because he said, come what may, we're going to be getting out on the 31st of October, and if this doesn't happen, he's obviously going to perhaps look a little bit foolish. Who knows? But that timetable was rejected, so there's quite a lot of questions now that come off the back of that vote. It's kind of in the hands of EU. Donald Tusk is probably going to extend, perhaps another 3-month extension. He's going to recommend that his colleagues agree, and then after that I would imagine there's probably going to be a general election again. Great. So this saga just continues to be incredibly drawn out. But leaving that aside, we've got a pretty thin calendar as far as the economic data is concerned today. Tomorrow is the central bank day, so there's quite a lot of stuff that's going to go on tomorrow. So I wouldn't be surprised to see, maybe there's going to be some releases from the EU suggesting about the extension. There's probably going to be a bit of volatility or reaction if that does happen, but if it doesn't, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a relatively quiet day as price starts to get ready for tomorrow's announcements from the central banks. Okay, so let's go and have a look at some charts. Got a few that I want to show you. Let's start off with the 60-minute chart here. I showed this on Monday as well, and the blue swing markers are showing how since the 8th, 9th of October we've been in a bullish trend, which is defined by a series of higher highs and higher lows, all confirmed until recent price action, where the current low of 12,599 or 12,600, I'll say, is the current trend defining low. And what should have happened is that the 814 level should have been broken. That would have confirmed, technically this isn't actually a confirmed low, but I guess we could also say that at the moment this low has actually been used as a double bottom. So how strong that is, it's difficult to say. It becomes even less strong when you consider that this is a failed attempt to break above 814. So you've got to bring into question how strong this trend now is. Now, we've got a number of items on the right hand side here, which is a composite volume profile. It's drawn using all of October's data, and you'll notice that we've got a darker area and a lighter area. The darker area is the value area, so that's typically 68% of the volume, which is normally about 1 standard deviation either side of the point of control. And you'll notice that the value area high is around about here, just there, about 560, somewhere in that zone. So if we do break below this 599, it doesn't necessarily mean anything, because we're going to run into some potential support anyway. So I could see ourselves getting some kind of fake break is a possibility. It pierces through and bounces, finds some support, comes back into an area of value here. I can also start to see that the value area is going to begin to shift, because we've started to accumulate quite or carve out quite a a heavy high volume node or high volume zone in our current price area, as you can see on the right hand side. So if we break to the downside, 12,466 is another option. It's probably a little bit higher now, maybe sort of 480. There's a high volume node here that may well catch price to the downside that could be interesting to buy if you remain bullish. If we break higher, well, I mean, you've got to start to look quite a long way left in order to find some potential zones to target. Maybe we can see those on the daily chart. 12,883 and 13, as well as the 13,187 would be the most obvious zones to look to target. So on the daily chart, we've got this pitchfork here that's been on the chart for a week or two now, and we're currently trading around this median line, which has already been tagged a couple of times. Frequency of prices perhaps started to change a little bit. However, it still remains an interesting zone to watch, and breaking above this could be very, very interesting. The key bar really that I was watching was this one here. We failed to break above the high of this pin bar, you can call that. So over the next day or two, I'd like to see whether or not that high remains intact. Okay, let's do something a little bit different here. I'm going to go into a 250 tick chart, and I want to show you just a couple of things that I observed over here. So first things first, you'll notice that at the beginning of the session yesterday we had a gap higher, and from then price pretty much failed to hold any bullish momentum and trickled to the downside all throughout the right up until sort of the European Open. And this area here, from here to here, you'll notice is about 6-7 hours worth of price action, but it's condensed into a very, very small area. And the reason for that is that this is a tick chart, so in the overnight session there is not a large amount of volume traded, so each candle needs to receive 250 trades in order to form, and so if that doesn't happen in a large period of time, you won't get that many candles. So that's why it doesn't take up a lot of space. That's why I like to use tick charts. And conversely, on the other side, if you have a lot of volume in a short period of time, it's going to produce a lot of candles, and it just allows you to read the story of price just that little bit easier. So with that being said, the IB is something you should become familiar with as traders. I share, well, I have got a series of analysis, instructional videos for how to use market profile techniques, and the initial balance is one of those tenets or techniques within market profile. And initial balance is an incredibly useful technique to get to grips with. It's, well, I'll leave you to Google it if you're not familiar with it already. I'm not going to teach you to suck eggs. But if we just map the IB on here, then we've got our IB low down here at 12,723. We've got the midpoint in there at about 750, and an IB high at 775. And what I noticed straight away is that IB high, we'll take a look at on the market profile in a minute, but that IB high was quite interesting, and there was a rejection candle here which sort of was making me sort of keep an eye out on things. But we had a small range extension, didn't get particularly far. In fact, I think it was about 25% range extension, which is really weak, to be fair, and failed to even break above the overnight high. Well, I guess I can call it the overnight, but the pre-European Open high and the Asian session. So that was a sign of weakness for sure. Price retraces back down towards the midpoint of the initial balance. It continues to trend lower, and then we had this level in here. So as price was starting to trend, it broke a little bit, so it's maybe starting to reverse, but we've got this rejection here that was really, really interesting. My fingers are obviously still asleep. I think as well you could have even drawn just a basic downtrend or down sloping high to high trend line here. Notice how it tags on the other side over here. So just a couple of things that were interesting. Maybe you could form that would be some kind of center line in the making that will be of potential use. Back inside the IB, it traded inside the IB for the majority of the session, and then look at that, it kind of found this zone again. So this is where people were starting to maybe place some orders, and maybe as the market ran away from them, they weren't able to complete their trade. They wanted to get more on, but as soon as it gets back in that zone, they were able to dump the rest of their order on. Or you might say that as price got up here, a lot of traders were starting to buy, and then as price ran away from them, they were trapped. So when it gets back into that position, they can dump their orders. So you've got the two types of trade that kind of act together. And then from here, we had the IB break to the downside, 50% range extension. And then in the overnight session now, past 100, in fact with a gap, past 100 down towards the 150 range extension. So that was interesting, and again a nice little story that it was trying to tell us. But with the profiles themselves, I mean, if I just condense yesterday up, I mean, it started off as a kind of a neutral looking profile, normal distribution, but in actual fact it's a little bit skewed. It's a kind of non-normal variation of this profile. But the IB is the most interesting part, because the IB formed within the value area of the previous day, and the value area of that profile yesterday formed within the initial balance, despite price closing below the value area of yesterday and below the value area of the previous day. So that kind of gives a sign for how price action might begin beginning of the next day. And right now the initial balance is beginning to form. We're only 11 minutes in, to be fair, so you know, it's not going to provide us that much clarity just yet. We'll give it another 40-50 minutes or so to form, but it certainly does look like at the moment it's going to be wanting to form its IB below the value area of yesterday, which of course is a bearish sign. So we just take a look at some of the levels that we're going to be watching for today. We're already below the majority of them. Point of control, the pivot 723 could be interesting if we bounce up towards that. You'll notice how I've removed all of the price action, or have I, or am I a tick chart instead? I'm a tick chart instead. Let me just make sure that I've done both, to be fair. So I'm going to get the overnight session back in, put it on a tick chart. There we go. So already underneath the pivot, 724 could be an interesting area to watch, but 740 will also be a good one, because that's the value area from yesterday. It stayed within that for the majority of the session yesterday, and then, you know, obviously made a run to break that towards the end. So as price was so happy in that zone, you'd imagine that as it gets back up towards the value area low, if the market is insistent on staying forging a new area, then it will be rejected at that level. So we'll see. So if we were looking to sell today, we'll be looking for a rejection of 740 if it gets there. Was it that interesting yesterday, price action, the break to the downside? I mean, you could say yes. There was a double distribution here on the previous day, and we stayed within that for the majority of the session, and breaking below that, there is a low volume area here. So it wasn't a surprise to see such a fast move through, but it was interesting to see how price closed below the value area. So as for today, have we got momentum? Well, I mean, no, not yet. I don't think so. If there was going to be momentum, I'd like to see some momentum to the downside, but I can quite easily see price finding some support here at this composite value area and bouncing back to where it was yesterday and consolidating sideways. Could quite easily go that way. So I will be, if you like, using my strategy as a discretionary for purposes today. So I might ignore a couple of the signals that it sends, like I did yesterday, but I will send the screenshots through in the channel anyway. Right guys, I'm going to try and keep it to about 15 minutes. I think we're there now, so I'm going to leave it there, and unless any of you guys want to add anything else, but if you do, I want to pause or close the video now and answer the questions in the room anyway for you. Alright guys, I'll see you probably again on Friday. Have a good trading session.